Now let's look at unit standard of needs and wants of an entity or of an individual. That is unit standard 242573. And this unit standard covers obtaining information in order to determine the risk and profile to ascertain needs of an entity, analyzing information to crystallize the needs of an entity, determining potential financial solutions, comparing and evaluating potential solutions against key financial aspects, proposing a potential solution to an entity. So you would know if you are in the financial services industry already that needs analysis is one of the core and first components of providing a solution, because you cannot provide a solution if you don't understand the needs of your particular client. Let's go right ahead. So let's first look at the background of risk. What is the nature of risk? So risk is presented whenever human beings are uncertain of the future. On the previous unit standard on scenario planning, we said the more uncertain the future is, the higher the risk. It's like walking into a dark room, for instance. If you walk into a dark room, you don't know what you're stepping on, you don't know who is there. The more uncertain, the higher the risk. You want to switch on the light, or you want to probably get a torch, to have a better view of the rest of the room, and so that it can serve you better. So that's what, the nature of risk is. It's about gaining perspective of what the uncertain future is, and in terms of managing risk, it's about gaining perspective of what the future actually looks like, and what is the relationship between insurance and risk. Well, almost the words are almost synonymous. Whenever you hear the word risk, you hear the word insurance, because insurance, it's there to help us mitigate and sometimes completely remove risk that is uncertain. Some is inevitable, like death. For instance, if you are covering yourself, through a life cover as a breadwinner, you are making sure that should the risk of your inevitable death come by, the people that are your beneficiaries or your dependents are there to receive, at least something to push them through, so that the void, especially the economic void, won't be felt so significantly. So that's the balance between risk and insurance. And insurance work with the law of large numbers. The law of large numbers means that there is no insurance without the big numbers. The big numbers are the premium contributors, the people that are contributing to make sure that there's huge lump sum that's available for someone who's contributing only about 150 rands per month, but they are able to be covered for, like, let's say 600,000 or 500,000 worth of value of the asset, or the life, if it's a life cover. So the issue of insurance is there, and it works only in when the big numbers are there. I hope that is clear. So let's look at an example. One example is that Bob actually has 150 that he's paying for a premium, and that 150 covers for the loss of a house. Loss of a house is, if it's destroyed by fire, the person will be covered for 500,000. Money received from insurance in the event of a loss. So they covered for 500,000. In the event of a loss, they gain 500,000. The net loss in the event of fire is 150. So the net loss, what they have parted with, is 150. In the event that there is no fire, it's also 150. So it's equalized in that manner. Then in the effect of the net loss. In terms of Steve doesn't have any cover for the house, and loss if house is destroyed by a fire, it will be 500,000. Money that will be received if the person actually, the house is destroyed by fire, is zero. And the net loss in the event of fire is 500,000. The net loss in the event of no fire is zero. So you can see that, the insurance is justified in this particular manner, where the person has taken a huge risk, of 500,000 and carried it when they would have covered that risk for a mere small premium of 150 per month. So that is a mere example. Premiums are a little higher, especially for this higher amount, depending on the value of the house or so forth. But this is just a mere example to say, for a small premium, you can be able to cover a big potential loss should it happen. So let's look at the different concepts of risk that help us understand it better. So one that we'll actually look at, it's fundamental, the difference between fundamental risk and particular risk. So fundamental risk in simple ways means that kind of risk that we have very little control over, that kind of risk that is external, that kind of risk that, that affects almost everyone. So for instance, the nature, in terms of nature, that would be floods. If floods come by, then they would affect, everyone else. And it would be very hard to stop floods from happening. It's just a way of nature. What we would cover ourselves is that, we make sure that should floods come by, whatever damage they do to our assets, we are covered for those kind of, for that kind of a risk. In terms of an economy, inflation, it's not something that can be, managed easily. The Reserve Bank tries to manage inflation through interest rates by lowering them down, but there's also the balance that inflation is pushed when people are actually buying a lot. When people are buying, it means the economy is growing. That's one way that inflation actually increases through the demand of certain goods and services, but it can also increase through the increase of goods and services in terms of the supply, the oil, those kind of things actually push inflation. So we have very little control over those things. It's the OPEC countries that decide on the oil price and the demand and supply of the particular oil. So that would be fundamental type of a risk. Particular risk is the risk that is mostly in our hands. So we decide when to drive a car, whether to drive a car or not. We decide whether to have a house or not. We decide to get on the road with a car, so those are the particular risk that are associated with our behavior. It's almost like a cause. We cause something and then there's an effect, but it's a risk also. We don't probably, intentionally do it. That's why it's uncertain. That's why it will happen randomly. So that's particular risk. And another concept, other concepts that you need to understand is pure and speculative risk. So pure risk, consider it that the only outcomes out of pure risk are, adverse outcomes. So for instance, if a car gets into an accident or if a house burns down, that is a pure risk. And that is mostly what is insurable. And then there's speculative risk. And the speculative risk is when the outcome is either good or bad. For instance, if you get into a trade of a stock, you are buying and selling shares, the shares might go up, the shares might go down, or you can completely lose your money. That is speculative risk, because it means that that there could be some profit that can be made there. It's not only adverse, it's either or. That is speculative risk. So that's some of the two other concepts that you need to understand about risk. So let's go into risk identification. So when you're doing your client profiling, there's a certain risk identification process that you need to go through. And number one is an analysis of the major types of loss affecting the individual or the firm. So what are the major type of losses? And that's the concept of when you go into a unit standard that talks about insurance, pure insurance, and trying to understand and unpack what insurance is, you'll then understand what is insurable risk. If there's a major potential loss that is affecting the person or individual, that's what we call an insurable risk in that particular thing. So for instance, if you have a car and you own the car, it's in your name, you bought it, then there's an insurable interest into that particular car, because if you can get into an accident, then you will suffer potential loss because of that. So this is about analyzing the major type of losses that a particular person actually has or a firm actually has. what assets do they have? And if those assets were to get into a risk, what kind of potential loss are they looking like? And then the second one is to look at, search for all the immediate causes of such losses. What would be the causes or the drivers that are causing these losses? So you want to look at, can you manage the causes of that risk? Can you manage them so that you mitigate or make sure that the losses don't actually occur? If you cannot manage them, obviously you then have to look for a solution on how to mitigate that particular loss through insurance and other forms. And then the third one is to assess the underlying causes and their consequences. So you assess then the underlying causes, and then you look at the consequences. If this could happen, what would be the consequences? What would be the impact? That's what you're actually looking at. On the previous unit standard, we spoke again. I gave you a quadrant where we are looking at the model of the amount of uncertainty on the other hand, and then on the horizontal level, we are looking at the amount of impact. So that would tell you that what is mostly uncertain and what is the most impact, and try and measure using that model to see if something should be covered and to which extent should it be covered. Because at the end of the day, we've got limited resources, we've got limited money. If we had to mitigate or buy insurance, we would have to look at the things that have the highest impact, that can cause the biggest loss or damage. So let's look at the different kinds of risk profiles that the clients have. We've almost, like this, the industry is almost categorized clients into different risk profiles, depending on their risk appetite. So for instance, the conservative profile would be someone who is looking at very little minimum exposure to equities. We are looking here at about 15% of equities, and cash is 30%, which is cash is, your money market, just money sitting in the bank account, just to be safe, for instance, for a rainy day. And the bonds and income securities, bonds are known for providing security and so also providing some kind of form of income from the interest that comes from there. So they make up a major aspect of the profile for the person who is risk adverse. So this person still wants to get money. They don't just want to put money away. They want some form of consistency in terms of that income, and they are putting little risk, or they are willing to stomach some volatility or risk through 15% exposure to the stock market, as we know that equities are one of the riskiest asset classes that are out there. So that's a conservative profile. And then we look at the prudent profile. What is a prudent profile? You're looking at 40% equity. So there's a little higher exposure to equities. There's still a bit of cash, but it's sitting at 10%. Previously on the conservative one, it was on 30%. So this person is willing, to take a little more risk than the conservative one. And on the bonds and income securities, they still want to gain some income. Remember that equities is about capital growth, and then bonds is about receiving a constant income, but without actual capital growth in the money that you invested. And then the cash, it's actually receiving sometimes lower than inflation type of interest. So that's what a prudent profile actually looks like. If you would know the prudential laws, you would understand that the pension fund is actually based on the prudential laws, where they actually say that you can only expose equities of pension funds to a certain extent. And we'll talk about that into the unit standard that looks at the pension funds in a later modules. And then let's look at the moderate rate profile, for instance. The moderate rate profile has a little higher risk than the prudential one that we looked at. It's at 55%, cash is still 10%, and bonds is 35%. So you would be able to understand the prudential person in this particular manner, that they are the ones that are, more likely to take higher risk than the previous one, but they still want that constant income. They still want a bit of money saved, so that it's not exposed too much to the risk. Then you've got the venture sum profile. In fact, most of these profile are, self-explanatory with their words, but don't worry about cramming them for now. Eventually, you'll get to understand them. As you see that the higher the profiles, the more the exposure to equities, the higher the risk. And then this one is sitting at 75%, which is quite high from the conservative one that we actually started with. It's 75%, and the bonds is 20%, and the cash is 5%. And then we come with the aggressive profile, which can take, one of the highest exposure to equities into 85%. This is the person who wants capital growth, and they actually probably looking at investing for a longer term because, equities have been proven to be performing exceptionally well in the longer term. In the shorter term, they are more volatile. It means they fluctuate too much. And then, so the equities would be 85%, 5% on cash, and then 10% on income. So this risk profile is it's the far end of the conservative one, and the other ones are just in the middle. And that was the different kind of risk profiles that are out there. Most of the portfolios are actually based on these risk profiles that you would sell from the different insurers or whoever asset manager that you actually work with. And then the category 2 is about affordability. And this is a significant portion of risk profiling your client, because you want to make sure that they are, whatever goal that they are setting, it's realistic, first of all, and it can be sustained. Also for you and most financial planners, and through commission. So you need to make sure that whatever that you're putting them through, it's not only for, to be excited that a person is taking a cover for this amount of money, but they will be able to sustain that cover through a longer time. And I mean, we've seen a lot of, financial planners and brokers who are dependent on commission. They will just sell the product based on what their needs are, based on the financial planner's needs and not on the needs of the customer, which is completely not correct, because it means that you are putting your needs at, in front of the needs of the customer, who is the actual person who is paying. But secondly, this is not sustainable for both the client and the financial planner, because even if you've received a lump sum of commission at the beginning, then there would come clawbacks, into that commission that you have already earned. So that has been the practice for the longest time in the industry. And what we encourage is that you put the client first, and that will reward you back in terms of building a long-term relationship with the client. The client knows that you actually have their best interest at heart. Remember that things like financial planning are personal services. You are building a personal relationship with a person. It's easier to now get referrals when the person actually got the right kind of advice. So affordability, not only at the budget level, but you must also, I'm encouraging people that do needs analysis that they need to look at the credit report of an individual as well. How much is this person exposed to debt? How much is this person paying in interest? When are they going to finish? You need to be a financial planner, not only sell products. That's what financial planning is. And then the category 3 looks at the possible solutions. And the solutions, we start by gathering information, obviously, about the needs and wants of the particular client and the current financial position, which you've already covered. And you need to ask specific questions, ask them why they actually need, not want or what you think they need. It's important to ask them what they actually need and to use data to back up whatever that they actually said. That's why when you spoke about the needs analysis and we say you need to, do a bit of research, a bit of background, and to look at the risk exposure, for instance, if you are selling risk products for this particular person, look at when you do a needs analysis, you need to look at when is the person, likely to go on pension, or how many years fears are they left with? Those details will give you the potential solution that you actually need to give to the person. It's no use to try and duplicate products. The person already has a retirement annuity, and that's sufficient because they already have an employer pension fund, but you also want to sell them a retirement annuity because it benefits, the company that you work with, or you personally, for commission purposes. It doesn't help, because later a lot of clients come back and say they didn't understand what they're putting themselves through, and then it affects you negatively. So it's important to base this needs analysis on a questionnaire. Most companies actually have systems that they've designed where you'll input some kind of information that empowers you to be able to do a detailed objective analysis of the needs of the particular client. And when you ask questions, you then need to ask questions constructively. You need to ask questions strategically, depending on the answers that you need to get. For instance, there's close-ended questions where you can ask maybe, are you a risk taker or not? There you need a yes or no. Or you can, depending on what you are trying to achieve, you can ask how much risk can you take? And then you're allowing the person to flow, to open up, to talk about their fears, their anxieties, and tell you why they are willing to take this. And you have a conversation around that. So it's important you look at category 3, which is about potential solutions. And these are some of the things that, for instance, affect potential solutions. Number one, we are looking at time. These are the things that influence the client's investor profile, risk profile, and the potential solution that you'll provide. Obviously, looking at time, the more time horizon, it means the more the person is willing to put money into an investment instrument or investment vehicle, the more they can take the risk, the more they can consume the risk. Like I mentioned before, that for instance, equities, instruments that can be invested for a longer time, and can they've proven over time that they can beat the market over a long time, or over a medium time, let's say about 5 years to about 20 years. That's why most of the retirement money is actually put into equities so that the capital can grow. Age, if the person is older, they are lower the risk. If the person that is younger, the more they are willing to take the risk, because they can have that time horizon again to be able to grow with the investment. If it fluctuates, they can take those losses, but they can grow with the capital or the financial instrument that they invested with. And I mean, it's been proven again that wealth contributes. The more wealthier the person, the more they are likely to actually take more risk, because they almost have a buffer. This is not the person who's investing their last money, so they are willing to take more risk. And most of the wealthiest people, actually got there through knowledge. So they're more knowledgeable of the financial services industry and what is there, what is available. So they come in knowing what exactly they need, and the likelihood is that they are going to take more risky assets. So the more wealthy the person is, the more adventurous and the more risky they are, or risk profile, their risk profile is quite higher. But this is not a box. You get people that want to take risk in the short term, despite of the many scientific evidence that shows that in the short term the stock market or the financial instruments are very volatile if you are exposing them to things like equities. You get people that are older that want to take more risk because they feel that they have the pressure to actually catch up with capital growth because they had not saved sufficiently or invested early enough. You've got wealthy people that are more conservative, probably because they are running a business and they don't want to lose their profits through the stock exchange losses. So it's also important not to only box people like this, but this is just saying these are some of the contributors to people's profiles, risk profiles. So let's look at, for instance, an analysis tool, that are being used to assess, the risk of the potential risk of an entity or an individual. So first of all, we need to realize that there's a difficulty in risk assessment, in determining the rate of occurrence, since statistical information is not available on all kinds of past incidents. So if for instance, a risk is to be analyzed, we use previous data, or the underwriters actually use previous data to see what is the potential occurrence. For instance, they can categorize people based on race, based on age, based on, a lot of things. And they can tell that based on these things, although it's not allowed to discriminate people based on race, but based on these profiles, this person is likely to actually have cancer. This person is actually likely to have this and that and that and that, So based on that, or based on their age, then they're able to, provide some kind of risk profile, or, provide some kind of assessment on whether the chances of that person getting this is higher or not, or the chances of that person getting into this kind of risk is higher or not. Because sometimes there isn't that accident that has happened previously. I mean, for instance, the world was caught off guard with this pandemic. I mean, because the last time it happened, I think it was a couple of years ago in the 70s, a pandemic like this broke out. So the world was not ready, was very relaxed, and had no resources to actually deal with such things. That's why we saw ourselves in the issues that we actually have, that there was not even a vaccine that had developed for this kind of a virus before. So it's a first. So that is the reason why it's difficult to assess these type of risks. So some tools have that limitation. So that's something that we need to consider. Furthermore, evaluating the severity of the consequences, it means the impact is often quite difficult for immediate immaterial assets. So immaterial assets, a brand, for instance, you can say it's an immaterial asset. There's something that they put in a company, they call it goodwill, for instance. It's an immaterial asset. We talk about software, intellectual property. It's not something that is tangible, and it's very difficult to assess the impact that can happen should any risk should it be exposed to any kind of risk. So that's another limitation that comes when we have to assess risk. Asset valuation is another question that needs to be addressed, which it comes to model. So there's different models of doing asset valuation. We can bring someone today to do a valuation of a house, and that person, can provide a valuation of 1.5 or 1.8 million, and another could come and provide a valuation of 2 million. So the difference can between 200,000 and 500,000. So that's a huge difference. So those are other things that we need to look at and be open-minded in terms of these different models, and we need to choose the best one that's suited to the situation. The common formula that is used for risk assessment is the rate of occurrence multiplied by the impact of the event equals risk. The rate of occurrence. So the more the likelihood of this occurring and the impact that it might have of the event, the more it's the higher the risk. So for instance, if you live in certain locations, they'll tell you when you're trying to take a car insurance, they'll tell you that that location is high risk, so the likelihood of that event occurring is higher, and therefore the risk is higher. So that is a model, a common formula that is used in the risk industry to determine how much risk or impact that it can be there. Then let's look at potential risk treatments. How do we make sure that we are not exposed to too much risk? What can be done? Once risk have been identified and assessed, all techniques to manage the risk fall into one or more of these following: avoidance, elimination. So if we realize that, for instance, trains are more riskier, so can you eliminate? Can you use an alternative, a taxi? Can you buy a car? That's avoidance. So this is eliminating the risk completely. Although you are exposing yourself to a different kind of risk, maybe when you start using taxis or cars, but it means the risk that associated with the train has been completely eliminated because you were able to avoid this event completely. simply by not going there. So you have much control over it. And then there's the reduction of risk, so when we look at moving, again, using the analogy of an example of a train, moving from the avoidance and you go to reduction. Maybe you're saying statistically it shows that, trains have more accident than taxis. So you've actually reduced the risk of being in an accident by getting into a taxi instead of traveling with a train. So that's reduction of the risk. And then there's retention. It means you can accept the risk depending on the impact or the occurrence. When you've measured the risk and you realize that, there's a little risk in this, I can consume it, or I've got sufficient money that if something like this could happen, I can be able to contain it. For instance, I'll say if the car were to break, you don't have a car maintenance plan or car maintenance insurance, and you know that you are driving a more reliable car. People have praised Toyota, for instance, for being a more reliable car, and it's cheaper to maintain. So you say, I can buy second-hand, even if it's out of maintenance plan, because I can be able to afford based on my income should something like this happen. But you need to, look at the worst case scenario. And say, should things fail so badly, what could it be the worst that actually happens with the engine or maintaining the car? And I mean, you can measure it and say maybe the worst could be 8,000 that's required. And you say, I'm willing to take this. Unless the car is obviously written off, then you've suffered a significant loss. But that's a different kind of insurance than the maintenance of the car. So that's acceptance of risk. And then there's transfer risk, and that's buying insurance. So if you are able to buy insurance, then you've removed the risk from your hands and put it in another person's hand. When we made the first example of Bob, who actually paid 150 to cover the house that is worth 500,000, should that house burn down, they receive the 500,000. Should that house not burn down, they've only lost about 150, paying for that premium. The other person, it's a different story altogether. Should the loss actually happen, they've suffered significantly. Should the loss not happen, it's not much that they have actually lost in terms of the premiums that they would have contributed. So that's the transfer of risk from you. And that's what the insurance is actually about. It's about transferring risk from the particular consumer or the individual or entity to an insurer. And that's what justifies the premiums. So let's look at the regulations of the financial needs analysis. For instance, the financial advisory and intermediary services, what is known as FAIS, which governs how advice is actually provided, or the intermediaries, the companies that are providing the financial products, that is FAIS. And Financial Intelligence Act is FICA, which was introduced a while ago to deal with the issues of money laundering and issues of tracing where the money actually comes from. That is very significant because a lot of money actually gets laundered, especially when it gets invested into stock markets or properties. Some people that are up to no good, they take money, they transfer it from whatever, drugs, and then they put it into financial assets. So it's a responsibility of the financial intermediaries to make sure that they have FICA documents. They can be able to trace where the money comes from. But there's something that they know that they call know your client, for instance. That says that you need to collect the documents and collect the audit trail of actually where the money comes from. And then there's the POCA, the Protection of Organized Crime Act, which is there also, for especially white collar crime, that is happening in the financial services industry. If you can know how much money leaves the country, for instance, without being detected. So this is, protection of organized crime, that crime that is at high level, so there's particular organizations that are there to make sure that, this money doesn't leave the country or doesn't, share hands and it gets lost, in trail, because it will be hard to actually track once it gets into the right hands, into the wrong hands. Protection of constitutional democracy against terrorism and related activities, so that's another one, that's there, that is, related to terrorism, because, believe me, some of the people that actually commit terrorism have a huge exposure on assets. They own, gold barrels, they own Bitcoin assets, they own properties and all those things. And that's how they get to finance these terrorism acts. So these laws are there to protect and make sure that, the financial services industry is pure, is protected, and it serves the people that it needs to serve. And then let's look at determining the potential solution. First of all, you need to look at holistic picture of an entity at risk. What is the entity at risk? You look at the holistic picture, all areas without missing anything. That's why gathering data is very significant. Knowledge of the socio-economic and political trends apply to the needs of an entity. So you need to look at social and political trends, and to make sure that those are covered. You look at, on the last unit standard, we look at the environmental analysis, which look at the pests, political, environmental, technology, and social, other areas that can actually affect the person from externally. So those things need to be looked at when you're doing a needs analysis, because it's not only the things that people do, but it's the things that are outside that can actually affect the person as well. And then we look at the potential solutions that are matched to explicit needs and the range of possible options formulated for a specific entity. A typical example of the potential solutions, for instance, that we can recommend to a client. And here we have retirement, for instance, as a potential solution, depending on what have you assessed and what did you find based on your assessment. Retirement obviously having the foremost biggest benefit being tax deductibility. Tax deductibility, it means you can be able to invest and put away your money for the future, but also it becomes tax deductible. And we look at this when we do our tax unit standard. The tax deductibility, it means your taxable bracket or your taxable income becomes lower because you start removing your retirement annuity distributions, contributions, before you get to your net. So they become some of your deductions, and they reduce, your net, and they make sure that, your contributions or the taxable income is lower. So you save in that particular manner. And then it ensures peace of mind, obviously, when you retire. Difficult to waste funds as they are paid to you on a monthly basis, like an annuity. At the end of the term, when you receive your money, maybe at 55, which is early retirement, or at 65, which is the actual retirement, you then are able to get the money, but you are getting 1/3 of it, which is, some people consider it as a disadvantage. You get 1/3 of it as a lump sum, and then the rest is given to you as an annuity. So the benefit of that annuity is that you get money monthly, unlike getting a huge lump sum. That might be a challenge as other people have gone to waste it. I think you might know stories of people in government who have, accessed their pension fund, and then they go and extend their houses or buy taxis or start a small shop, and things don't go well, and then they're going to leave off the government because they didn't manage their money lump sum well. And then the last one is an advantage, can add the life cover and supplementary benefit into it. So your retirement annuity can add something as a supplementary benefit into it. Normally it comes at an additional cost. And then here some of the benefits is proceeds are taxed at retirement. But when the proceeds are taxed at retirement, you know that the income bracket normally is way lower. And as you were contributing into this, the money was not being taxed as it grows, which is a huge benefit, because you know that when you get your capital growth in an asset, that money as a capital growth gets taxed, which is called the capital gains tax. As you get your dividends or income from whatever that you invested in, you get taxed as well, which is called a dividend income tax. So when the money grows within the retirement annuity, then it gets compounded because it's not touched by tax, neither by you as well. So that's the significant benefit there. And then the disadvantage, like we mentioned, that you cannot access the funds until you retire. So if you had not put money for retirement, this would be a great, vehicle, or the client that you're actually assisting. And then let's look at the income protector as a potential solution as well, which provides a peace of mind, especially for self-employed people, pays a benefit monthly to assist bills and cost of living. You know, when you encounter, you know, a disability, maybe temporary disability, then you are able to sustain yourself at that particular time, and then can select your own waiting period, you know, depending on how the product is actually structured. And then the only disadvantage is that it becomes a very expensive product, and then it expires at 65 usually, because at that time you are no longer gaining, you are no longer employed. And then you have to be disabled for at least 3 months for the benefit to pay out, you know. So it needs to be a you know, not only a small disability, it needs to be something that is continuous. Benefit amount that you actually receive from there, it gets taxed. So that's some of the disadvantages of an income protector. And then the life insurance as the last particular example is that the life insurance, if you are young and healthy, it is very affordable. You know, if you don't have any chronic diseases, it's very, very, you know, affordable for you, and the benefits becomes high. You know, it pays out the lump sum upon death of insured to beneficiaries. So making sure that, you know, the beneficiaries are not left vulnerable if a person, you know, who is a breadwinner actually, you know, passes away. And then pays, the payout is tax exempt. So the payout from the life cover is actually not taxed. That's what it means. It's not taxed unless you then it's put under an estate. So if you don't select the beneficiaries in the life cover, so the life cover would say it's for 1 million, it's to the benefit is 4 beneficiaries, maybe it's a mother and the 3 children. So you know those 3 children share the money, and they share the money with the parent. Obviously the parent becomes the guardian of the money if you know, if they are not old enough yet. So that becomes a benefit if you've selected the beneficiary. If you haven't selected the beneficiaries, then it falls into your estate, and it's liable now for estate tax or estate duty. So that's the disadvantage around it. But if you've selected the beneficiaries, then it goes directly to them, and it does not form part of the estate, and therefore it's not taxed. Pays out directly to beneficiaries, not subjected to estate delays. So if the estate, for instance, has to be wound up, you know, the life cover would have paid directly to beneficiaries. It won't wait for the estate to be wound up. For instance, if there's complications around the estate, we've heard of estates that take very long, sometimes years, to actually be wound up because there's certain complications. Maybe there's certain people that you know, are opposing the will, or whatever the case may be. You know, then the insurance becomes a good benefit, so that the people that need to benefit are not vulnerable at a particular time, and can add supplementary benefits like disability benefit that normally comes at an additional cost as well. And then the disadvantage is that obviously, I mean, it does not benefit the insured directly. So it benefits the beneficiaries, and then the premiums can be high if old or in ill health. If you have ill health, like a chronic disease, then you know that the premiums are going to, because you are considered high risk. Will not pay out funeral expenses unless there's a additional benefit into it, you know, that is explicitly stipulated on the beneficiary or on the contract of the life cover. If beneficiary is not selected, then it falls into the estate. That's one of the things that I actually mentioned. We will go into details around tax, around estate planning. So don't worry if you know, you don't understand some of the dynamics around here. You just make sure that you understand that you know, once you've done your needs analysis, then there's disadvantages and advantages based on what the needs are. So for instance, if you were to recommend a direct investment product, you must know that those investment products are not tax deductible. So they will not help the person in any way as far as tax is concerned. Only when they start contributing into a retirement will they be tax deductible. So those are some of the solutions, and I hope you understood this. If you don't understand anything, you know that we've got a WhatsApp group. You can reach us on email, or you can call to make sure that you understand before you attempt your formative assessment. Thank you.